Serious Grower podcast. I'm Anna. I'm an entomologist. I'm a scientist, and I am using this podcast to talk to all kinds of growers and eaters who are serious about their farms, their gardens, their local food systems, and I'm asking, how can science help? Today, I don't have just one co-host, but many, and I will introduce them shortly. I spent the past few months developing research ideas for New Hampshire community-supported research to test out in the field this growing season, and you can see those project ideas and some of the feedback I've gotten to refine my original idea on our YouTube channel at NHCSR. And I knew I wanted to do something useful with tomato because it is such an important crop to our farmers here in the Northeast. It is a big old moneymaker, which means there's a lot on the line, but there's also a lot of ongoing research in support of that industry across the country. The more I talked about my project ideas with growers and the experts who supported them, I felt it's a little too overwhelming. But as the saying goes, how to eat an elephant one bite at a time. And I have some help from some of my colleagues in Extension who are not only incredibly bright, incredibly dedicated to their grower audiences, but are also just as obsessed with some of the questions I have about fresh market tomato production. And they are willing to get together every once in a while to talk about this stuff, share ideas, compare notes, troubleshoot issues they're having with their own growers. You'll hear little bits of these conversations as we eat this elephant together chronologically through the tomato season here in the Northeast. Even though most of the tomatoes that make it to your plate come in the form of processed products like sauces and soups, fresh market tomatoes represent one of the most valuable vegetable crops grown across the United States. Fresh market tomatoes grown for commercial sales will include all the tomatoes you might grow in your garden. Cherry and grape tomatoes are amazing for beginners because you don't have to worry too much about those fruit cracking. You'll get lots of joy out of your plants without too much babying. The larger slicing tomatoes require a little more horticultural skill and include the round or globe-shaped tomatoes and the beefsteak tomatoes. Some common beefsteaks include hybrid varieties like Beefmaster, but you'll also see lots of heirlooms in this category too, like Brandywine, Cherokee Purple, and Mortgage Lifter. That is a classic variety. The round varieties are typically bred for uniformity and are typically more resistant to cracking without the weird shapes of the beefsteak varieties. For home gardeners, you might be familiar with round varieties like Celebrity, Early Girl, Better Boy. And if you're wondering how Better Boy got its name, it was specifically bred from its famous predecessor, Big Boy. In 1949, the Burpee Seed Company introduced the Big Boy hybrid tomato. It became an instant hit because of its massive size and excellent flavor, but it lacked a strong disease resistance package and it had inconsistent yields. So Better Boy is higher yielding, it has more uniform fruit, and it has resistance to verticillium and fusarium wilts. Rumor has it that the fellow responsible for Better Boy stole some seeds from a line called Teddy Jones. That was one of the parent lines for Big Boy, and he took them to start his own company. Those plant breeders are an interesting bunch for sure. While our whole modern era of breeding is littered with this innovation or that innovation, this tomato, that tomato, one of the most recent innovations is the cocktail tomato. You may have seen this in the grocery store in the past 10 or so years. In the late 20th century, European greenhouse growers, particularly in the Netherlands, pioneered advanced hydroponic growing systems. They realized that selling medium-sized tomatoes, something between a globe tomato and a cherry tomato, directly on their stems, known as cluster or on-the-vine tomatoes, kept the fruit fresher for longer. Tail tomatoes were introduced to capitalize on a consumer who wanted the intense sweetness of a cherry tomato, but the premium feel of the traditional vine-ripened crop. Packaging them on the vine serves as a visual guarantee of freshness in supermarket displays. And personally, this has really worked on me as the smell of a tomato stem. Ooh, it incites a very different emotion in me that brings back memories of summers of yore, just crashing into my olfactory system in a really powerful way. And since the taste, smell, and look of a fresh market tomato is so critical, these crops are typically hand-picked compared to processing tomatoes that are harvested with machines. Growers also require considerable infrastructure in the field to keep those fruit up off the ground, where plant disease and excess moisture can ruin the value of a fruit grown for its look and taste and smell. The industry is also shifting towards more infrastructure to protect these plants from the elements, which just provides exponential improvements in crop quality and yield. The added bonus of keeping rain off of all of these plants also means a dramatic reduction in the use of fungicides, because most plant pathogens that cause crop loss in tomato thrive in wet conditions. So if you keep them dry, you don't need fungicides anymore. It's a beautiful system. We like to think about a kind of technological continuum with indoor hydroponic greenhouse production on one end. That's a very high-tech end, where you have to provide every little thing a plant might need, including nutrients, sometimes supplemental lighting, precision pruning, and training. And at the other end, the more low-tech end of that technological spectrum, you just have a few hoops and a little bit of plastic to keep the rain off of the plants. And you're growing those plants in the ground, staked and trained, pretty much like they're trained in open culture. We see this approach adopted pretty heavily in Florida because they grow at such a scale where it makes economic sense versus the complete control we see the Dutch exerting precision on the other end of the spectrum. That leaves the rest of us somewhere in the middle. High tunnels can be pretty much like a piece of plastic over the ground, but growers often adopt some mechanization strategies that make those high tunnels look a little bit more like those high-tech greenhouses. It really varies from grower to grower. Researchers are doing their best to keep up as new approaches raise new problems, and we definitely see a culture clash between traditional outdoor culture, people who are used to growing things in the field, and greenhouse growing. Folks who are used to growing outside have never really seen inside pests like aphid and thrips, or at least not in the way that they see them inside. And that is because naturally occurring biocontrol does a whole lot to manage that for us. Folks who are used to growing inside in greenhouses never had to deal with outside pests like caterpillars and stink bugs. So they don't have any advice for tunnel growers when they inevitably show up, but they kind of are used to having to handle aphids and thrips with a really aggressive approach. So crop management, pest and disease, they're just different enough that even the most experienced growers are caught a little flat-footed. I spoke with Patricia Prade, a fellow entomologist and jack of all trades, serving fruit and vegetable growers in Pennsylvania, to find out more about what she's dealing with in her state.
Tomatoes in Pennsylvania, most of the growers are either transition already or transition into high tunnels. Most of them. Like it's a very high number. And it's funny enough because tomorrow I have to visit one that's like 4 hours away from my office. I'm going to go visit him for half an hour. What I've seen the most here, what people that I talk with have problems with. One, the pests are overwintering in their greenhouses and their high tunnels, and they're doing nothing to control those pests.
Yeah.
So as soon as the plants start growing in the season, the crop gets highly infested of everything. I don't think I ever collected so many trips in a sample in my whole life. Also a lot of spider mites, and people are having problems actually identify this. There's like, I have this mite, I don't know what it is. And it was just 2-spotted spider mite. I didn't send to anyone yet, but it looks like, I think he has more than one species of thrips on his tomatoes as well. Yeah. Again, very high infestation. It's almost like the thrips complex is not just Western flower thrips. So we don't know exactly what's there. And they don't know what to do.
And neither do we.
No, we don't, right? Like, that's the problem, because I was like, okay, let me go talk to you in person and maybe we can figure this out. The Mid-Atlantic guide is a very good guide, but these people using greenhouses and high tunnels, especially in Pennsylvania, you can only use pesticides that are allowed to be used in greenhouses. And that guide doesn't have that information there. So a grower is going to be like, okay, it's tomato, I'm going to use the stain. He's kind of not going to remember to look if it's greenhouse or not for his high tunnel. We're talking about pesticide resistance, and which is nice, right? They pay attention actually to that. And I was afraid they were not. No, they are. But then they're like, but then what do I use? How do I understand what I can use, what I cannot use? And then, biocontrol is very good, but I had this high infestation and I started releasing biocontrol. Well, that's kind of late for biocontrol. Yeah. You should try to knock the population down. And I feel like all growers like to save money, but here they really like to save money. What biocontrol can I use that's going to kill everything, that's going to eat everything, right? I'm very excited about they are interested in using biocontrol. They want to reduce pesticides because of their family health, right? Especially a lot of our growers are family communities where their kids are going to help harvest it and this and that. But they don't know what to do, when to do it. And they try once, doesn't work. And then they're like, okay, it doesn't work anymore. Like, well, why it didn't work?
This is such a good topic to pick apart because when I first started working in high tunnels specifically, so just to place where we are, high tunnels, when I think of high tunnels, I think of plants being grown in the ground. And that's different from a greenhouse, which is container growing. Yeah. So they both look a lot like greenhouses. I think the average person would look at a high tunnel and say, like, that's a greenhouse.
It's a greenhouse. Yep.
Yeah. So when I first started working this, I was like, oh, I want to start looking at biocontrols and see how they perform in high tunnels. And I was going to people who have a lot of experience in greenhouse. And they were like, don't worry, we got this. We know what we're doing. We don't need any of your help. And I got a little metaphorical pat on the head being like, don't worry about it. Yeah. But it's so different in a high tunnel. So we have a lot of really, really good information about how to use biocontrol in greenhouse settings. But they start with clean material every time they plant their tomatoes, which is different from a high tunnel grower who will have 3 or so years of a honeymoon period with that soil. And then 4 or 5 years in, they're going, uh-oh.
I love the honeymoon period. Yeah. With everything. Yeah.
Right.
And I never had a problem. That's why I got high tunnels. Well,
yeah.
You're not special. Eventually we catch up to you.
So I think I need to go back to everything we know about biocontrol in greenhouse settings, see if it's appropriate for these soil settings. That's number one. You raised another really interesting question is does it take care of all my problems? And you also see this culture clash of people who grow things outside and grow things inside. And also that weird nexus that happens when all of a sudden inside becomes outside, when you have your sides down and then they open up, right?
And
so who are the other major players in, I think this grower is a good example because they have everything going on. They have their inside tunnel and they have their outside tunnel. And the growers like that are always one of my favorite things where you're you drive forever to go see them. And on the way there, you're oh, why am I doing this? And then as soon as you get there, you're oh, this is why. You learn so much by just seeing it, right?
Yeah. And that's why I'm going, right?
Yeah. Maybe next time we talk, you can tell me what you saw. But what are their other key pests?
So mostly right now, there are people keep calling and requesting help about basically trips, spider mites, a little bit of aphids here and there. Mm-hmm. Late season, whiteflies, of course. And there is always some kind of caterpillar going on.
Yeah. So whatever flies in from wherever.
Yeah. From whatever's around them.
We had a much longer conversation about all the unique problems of providing extension education across a diversity of growers and how each operation is finding their own niche in the market. And therefore, she really does have to take an individualized approach to education on the basics of integrated pest management and all the costs associated with one pest management practice. You mentioned that you have growers who are doing bespoke sales for restaurants. Tell me more about that. That sounds really interesting. Also, chefs know about tomato varieties?
They do, because flavor profiles are different. Some chefs send the grower seeds of the specific things that they want for their recipes. So to be seasoned, this very fancy 5 stars plus whatever restaurants, the chefs are okay, I want this one specific because that has this level of acidity. There's this sugar, whatever content. And then just thinking about that right now, I don't even know what kind of how a chef from Philly learned about my grower in the middle of nowhere, Pennsylvania, but that's the only thing she does.
She probably has a really good Instagram presence.
I don't think so. To be very honest with you, just thinking of, I need to go visit her and ask, so
how did you get to know these people?
To this day, right? Because
who knows? I think people find, with any career, you find yourself doing different things. People will start out going to farmers markets and then they'll be I am done doing farmers markets. It's just too much. But they will have created all these relationships with people who are also hanging out at the farmers markets and be I'm just going to focus on this one really specific thing. And that seems like a really great place to be.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking about that right now. Maybe they might add an auction. Because, Pennsylvania does a lot of auction of vegetables and people come from
Tell me how the auction works, because I'm not familiar with that.
It is the funniest and most interesting thing I've ever seen, because I grew up watching TV. They doing like cattle, right? Like those things. It is those huge containers full of whatever vegetable is they're trying to sell that day. And someone's going around, say the number of the lot and be like, $1, $2. And you're like, oh my gosh, it's like cattle, but it's for vegetables. If you're ever in this region during growing season, come visit, let me know. It is so interesting. And you get very fresh, picked like the day before vegetables. You see those trucks coming from New York and New Jersey, all over the place, because people want to come here buy stuff for a more affordable price, because there's a lot cheaper buy directly from the growers. And you buy a whole lot of something fresh, looking good, affordable. And it's funny because it's literally like those things you selling cows on TV is the exact same thing to do it, potato or like lettuce.
So it's clear that education about tunnel growing is not one size fits all, which is frustrating enough. But this area is really understudied from the research community. There is a small cadre of horticulturalists who are investigating growing practices in tunnel crops. I'm going to link to the multi-state group where they keep their annual meeting reports, because that's really where it's all happening. But there are really only a handful of entomologists who are studying pest management of insects in tunnels, and I got to catch up with one of them, Samantha Willden from Cornell AgriTech. We were joined by another fellow entomologist, Kamminga from Kentucky State University, and this conversation was very emblematic of the culture clash I'm talking about, where Kathy, who is an expert in vegetable pest management, was asked to give a talk about high tunnel tomato, because how different could they really be? So we took the opportunity to put together some key points to distinguish between tunnel growing and open culture. It was also very emblematic of something else I do all the time, which is assuming that everybody I know knows everybody else I know. Because I started asking them both about what kind of pests they're seeing right now instead of introducing them to each other.
I don't think I know where you... I'm Kathy. I'm at Kentucky State University in Frankfurt. And where are you located?
I'm at Cornell AgriTech in upstate, like Geneva, New York area, so close to the Great Lakes.
So you guys are up north.
Yeah, we're further. But we are dealing with spider mites. Across all the farms that I'm visiting, they all have spider mite issues right now, and they're really flaring up.
I'm doing a farm tour in a few weeks, and I've never worked on high tunnel tomatoes, but they're there, and I'm expected to talk about them. So what would you recommend for your growers with the spider mites? And I'm going to take notes.
Yeah. So spider mites, there are a lot of great predatory mites that are commercially available. I think prevention is really tricky. They can blow in from field crops or wherever. So like you're bound to get them, especially if you've had them the previous summer. So preventative tactics are great. Like so the predatory mites I really like that are used extensively in Europe, Amblysia swarskyii, are really great preventative predatory mites that they have a very generalist diet. So you can release those on, they don't do well on tomato, but they will do well on like if you have companion plants around. I'm finding that some of the cover crops that are really close by the tomatoes, like vetch, is very attractive for spider mites. So if you have some non-tomato plants that tend to get hit with spider mites earlier, these types of predators would be great on those plants.
Okay.
For tomato releases, I like a mixed release of, we call it the cucumerous mite. It's used mostly for thrips that will feed on spider mites. That, in combination with Persimilis, predatory mites, is a great combination. So Persimilis is a specialist that will eat down spider mite prey, and then cucumerous will kind of float around and feed on thrips and occasional spider mites. You have the swarskyii that's kind of about the high tunnel, keeping things around the tomatoes pretty clean, so you have reduced risk going in. So like for biocontrol, that's what I recommend. There are quite a few sprays, too, that are effective. Let me pull that up really quick. So I'm not sure what the Kentucky label requirements are.
Yeah. I'm just trying to get some things in my head.
Yeah. So check your legal interpretation of what a high tunnel is, because that would be step number one. Different states have different interpretations of what a high tunnel is. So New York and Indiana and maybe Massachusetts interpret high tunnels as a greenhouse. Therefore, only greenhouse labeled products can be applied. But that's not always
I think it's the same as in Kentucky. I feel like that's similar. I'll need to double check.
Yeah, this is going to be important because like we often joke that some states use the air bud rule, which is like there's no explicit rule against it. Like there's no explicit rule against dogs playing basketball. New York State, like the product actually has to say for indoor use.
And it has to have instructions.
Right.
Yeah.
In like say New Hampshire, unless the product explicitly says not for indoor use, you can use whatever.
Oh, okay.
That was like the New York standard. It changed in the past like 10 years.
Right.
Or residue analysis is going to change if there's not the same trajectory of breakdown with UV exposure.
That makes sense. Let's go back to spider mites in tomato, because every time we talk about tunnel tomato, it seems like the rules shift a lot when we talk about threshold. And most people are really thinking about a whole tunnel rather than like number of plants or acreage or anything like that. So I think your advice, Sam, on like, even if you don't even have tomato in there and you have some other weeds, like to get started early and often, just knowing that things can get away from you so much faster in a tunnel. What other advice do you have as far as like comparing and contrasting tunnel to open culture?
So spider mites are overwintering, and like anything that's in your high tunnel could be harboring the spider mites. They'll become active as soon as it gets warm enough, which is like March in high tunnel. So it's going to hit you earlier and at a much faster rate than open field production. With the open field, I found in New York, when we do have spider mites, they tend to really become an issue late in the season. It's almost like, who cares at that point? But it's the high tunnel growers who are struggling right now when the plants are young and vulnerable, which are the most concerning to me. So the spider mites will arrive earlier and they'll reach thresholds much faster. And for thresholds, there really isn't. I've been looking around about like when should we be applying predators versus making a spray. Obviously, you release your predators really early. Preventative releases are awesome if you use something like cucumeris or Californicus that will feed on non-spider mite prey to kind of keep them around. So those could be preventative releases. For Persimolis, when you first start to see some stippling, you'd be very careful about monitoring. Then I would release a ton of Persimolis as kind of a curative management approach. We're finding that repeated releases of Persimolis keep them at bay. They have to be on top of it and release every single week.
And are you mainly using sachets or any of the products you're using like sprinkle?
The cucumeris come in sachets, and so does Swirsky as well. Persimolis, that comes, it's not a slow release type predator. Like, they come in shaker bottles. You douse your plants with the shaker bottle for Persimolis.
Okay.
Persimolis is like the #1 spider mite predator right now. And they release on all sorts of crops. For tomatoes, you just need to release more of them than you would for a cucumber crop. So you can talk to your like insectary dealer person to see what the release rate should be based on your current pressure. The number I like to stick to is, so this, if you're doing regular sampling and counting spider mites on leaves, which no grower is doing, but for like research purposes, I do this. I like a release rate of like 1 predator per 10 spider mites like on a leaf. So if you like do some subsampling and you find like some density, then you can scale that up to see how many predators you need to really see an effect. Growers aren't doing this, but if I can sample for them, I can provide a better recommendation on how many predators they need, because I have a concern that they're not releasing enough. And so they're seeing no impact, but it's not because the predators aren't working. It's just there's not enough of them to see anything. So I'd like to make sure that they're releasing enough to register an impact.
Why is it different? Is it because of the trichomes, or why is it? Okay.
Yeah. For any pests on tomato, there's not a specific predator that is great with the trichomes. Like, they all die on impact at really high rates. So you just have to release a lot of them compared to like a cucumber crop. So one thing I've been I put a pin in for now, we do see resident phytoceid predatory mites show up on tomatoes from like the outdoor environment. They look a lot like the cucumeris Swirsky style mites. Like, they're just kind of creamy colored, but I don't know what species they are. So I'd like to identify those because they show up and they're wandering around. So there might be some good resident predators that I'd like to know more about. But the ones that are released commercially, like, they're not reared on a challenging plant like tomato. They're reared in like on factitious diet or on bean plants that are very hospitable, very smooth leaves. So when you throw them on tomato, they get stuck in the trichomes. They don't know how to wander around. So you would just have to release like double the amount you would on like a cucumber plant.
Because they're like wheat germ and they're eating like dust mites, right? Like that's where they're raised.
Yeah, it does matter. We just published some work a couple years ago. We were rearing some phytoceads on strawberry because that was the plant I was studying versus the traditional bean plant. And their behavior starts to shift over like 5 generations. They become better at navigating plants if you rear them on those plants for a couple of generations. Their behavior is pretty flexible, but those initial individuals that come in contact with plants in the fields, they don't do very well, but they're commercial products. So you can buy a lot of them and keep releasing them, and hopefully you can develop a more standing population. But yeah, the tomatoes are challenging for all of the bios that we have.
Would it make sense to talk about comparing, contrasting open culture and greenhouse? Because like my experience with talking about high tunnel grown vegetable crops is everyone in the greenhouse community is like, we got it. We know how to handle this. And they treat it the same as a greenhouse grown crop. And that's not appropriate. And then like you have people who like are used to outdoor culture and they're like, I'm sure it's like an outdoor crop and it's nothing like that. So do you want to just kind of go through the season and talk about the things like kind of comparing and contrasting what your pest status situation is? Different parts of the year.
Like I said, spider mites are the most problematic now. I'm starting to see thrips in these early planted tomatoes and the flowers and larvae on the leaves, but just occasionally here and there. And I'll say like this is a sample of like 4 growers that I visit every week. So it's a small sample size and they're located pretty close together. They have a very similar high tunnel with black plastic mulch, straw in the aisleways, and red deuce determinate tomatoes. So they are harvesting now. So this is what we're seeing there. So spider mites, they started a while ago. They were on the transplants very early. And so we've been monitoring them very carefully. And I do think that they were overwintering in some of the cover crops because a lot of folks use like a vetch, kind of oat, crimson clover mix. And the spider mite showed up first on that vetch. So if that wasn't terminated, those just jumped over. Aphids also, but I think, so aphids arrived pretty early, but the one tunnel that I scouted that had aphid issues, he released some lacewings and that helped eat them down, but also the parasitoids came in and wiped things out like overnight almost. And that seems to happen with the aphids. Like you have a problem and then it's like they're all parasitized. So I grabbed a bunch of them because I wanted to start a colony here. But over like 2 days, I set them aside and like 60% of them were parasitized. So there was no need for like a spray intervention. So if aphids, like give it a minute and let the bios come in because they're juicy, delicious things. So a lot of resident biocontrol agents that eat them.
I know we're entomologists, but I heard a report that they're already seeing leaf mold in tunnel tomato. So that is another standout disease that is very unique to tunnels. Like what's your experience with that? And like, do you have any advice on like an action threshold for leaf mold or?
Yeah, no, I don't have anything about, so I don't spray anything for leaf mold. Everything that we do is very cultural. So pruning, a lot of the determinate growers don't prune and they probably should. So they like all the leaves below the first fruit cluster can be removed. So I would continuously do that and thin those lower leaves on the determinate tomatoes that tend to get really packed. And that really helps to reduce disease risk. But for sprays like that, I'm not the right person to ask for like when to spray and what to spray.
All right. So going through the season, because you're kind of open culture, you might have moths coming in.
Yep.
Like what kind of caterpillar species are your growers having problems with in tunnels?
I've seen mostly yellow stripe armyworm are things that come in, and the hornworms are like the 2 that I see most frequently. But they occasionally come up. And they're so easy just to hand remove that I don't really see like decimated, like one plant will be decimated. And you're like, okay, there's a hornworm here that just ate half the plant, like grab it, throw it outside. So those are, I'm not too concerned about the moths that come in, but there's some really good like BT style sprays. The caterpillars don't move that much, so they're pretty easy to like detect and to remove. Once your fruit starts to come on is like the biggest issue, because if they're feeding on the foliage, I'm not too concerned, but if they're starting to feed on the fruit, that is a major concern. So I'd pay a special close attention to when your fruit started to come on, to see if there's caterpillars out there. But as you're pruning and walking through, you'll see if there's a caterpillar problem. You'll see massive leaves removed. You'll see droppings. So it's pretty easy to recognize. Finding them could be kind of tricky, but usually if you look around, you'll find the culprit close by.
Kathy and I kind of came up together a little bit. So like we have a little bit of cross-cultural stuff. And it just made me laugh, like having been in Virginia and knowing vegetables outdoor culture, where like most of your caterpillar species were like tomato fruit worm, da, 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 da. And then moving to New Hampshire and like doing surveys and asking people like, what's your number one tomato pest? And everybody's saying cornworm. I was like, that's really cute, right? Like I was like, really? I like hornworm. And that has to do with just like real estate. Like one hornworm can do a number if you're doing such high production in such small spaces. So I think search for them early and often, like know what the eggs look like. And that BTs can work, but only on the little ones.
Right. Yeah, the hornworms they're not the ones that keep me up at night. I'm more concerned about the thrips mostly that are vectoring tomato spot wilt virus. This is the one that I'm like, okay, that is an issue. If they're hot for this virus, then, we really got to be proactive about managing the vector or you'll lose your crop completely.
That's a really good point. Because like the hornworm, like they're really conspicuous, but that's different than losing the whole tunnel.
Yeah.
What about tomato spotted wilt virus? Like, what do we know about the regional prevalence of that? Because, like, I've just been hearing rumors right now. Like, is anybody tracking that?
Yeah. So I think a lot of us came to a similar idea at the same time, is doing this regional assessment of where this virus is, because I don't see it very frequently up here. I think last year there was one tunnel that had either tomato spotted wilt virus or INSV, both vectored by thrips. There's just one grower who had that. And they also had ornamental plants in that tunnel as well. So they were at especially high risk for this virus. I know folks in New Jersey are struggling with it, but not a lot of folks like in the north area, like where we are. I'm not seeing very many of them. But I do think there's like a linkage between ornamental growers who are bringing in like more diverse plants that have these viruses and thrips and sorts of things. But up where we are, where it's a lot of determinant growers, and some of them occasionally have like hanging flower baskets. But there's just not this like regional pressure that you would see closer to the city where you have more nurseries and more thrips movement.
So as far as thinking about Kathy's Kentucky tunnel growers, and I'm assuming that your audience, Kathy, is going to be outdoor culture people who are taking advantage of like one tunnel and maybe squeezing things in, or it's not going to be greenhouse people who are just moving into that.
Is that true, Kathy, do you know who's going to be attending your workshop?
I don't. I've never met these growers. I've never been out there. Just from what I've seen around like our university, usually there's just one high tunnel and they use it to get things started. And then sometimes they're going to try to grow. And from what I've seen, they're usually just smaller. Like it's just one. And I know that in other areas, there's people will have several. I don't know exactly what I'm walking into.
So thrips, spider mites, aphids are going to be your top 3 questions. Like, how do I deal with any one of these 3 pests? The caterpillars, another one. Hornworms, armyworms, tomato pinworm might be an issue.
I've been learning about tomato pinworm. I've read about it a little bit.
Yeah, we found very interesting stuff. I'm not sure where this data is and what's going to happen with it. But part of my Indiana scouting with Laura was looking for tomato pinworm. And we found that during the first year, this tomato pinworm was kind of isolated in farms that were close to Indianapolis. So there's like, maybe it's like an urban heat island effect thing, or like one grower brought in some weird tomatoes that had tomato pinworm and it's spreading from this one location. We don't know. But then we start finding it more and more, or it could just be observer, like we know more what to look for. So we see it more often as we scout. But it was present at most of the farms that we found in Indiana at very low numbers. But we would find it during mostly later, like mid to late in the season, we'd find tomato pinworm. It is problematic because management tools, like I don't know if we have tomato pinworm on pesticide labels for greenhouses because it's not really like a greenhousey style pest. So I'm worried about it here because what products do we have? That's the issue with our labeling is high tunnels have all of the pests that open field crops do, but we don't have label like target sites on greenhouse products because there's never been a need in a greenhouse to manage leaf-footed bugs, for example. So pinworm, there's some really great resources that Laura Ingwell put together on like what to look for and how to scout for them. The concern is that the larvae are in between the leaf layers, and so you can't spray for them. You have like a very short window before the larvae get into the leaf layers and they're protected. So you need a systemic style product, which there's not very many now. And they also will pupate in the fruit, which is like the bigger concern. The leaves will start to roll. You'll see this like kind of blotchy area that is a little bit transparent. But if you pull that apart, you'll see a little caterpillar or a little thing right in the middle of those leaf layers. And they're kind of purple when they get to be more mature. They're quite small, but once they're like the last instar, they're kind of chunky. You'd see them and they'd be inside, like in between the leaf layers. So, like keep an eye out for this type of damage. We did find it in southern Indiana, which is very close to you.
Right,
And I think it's more of a warm season pest anyway, so they might be present.
Think about, and like this may be a danger zone for you because you don't really want to get into horticultural practices, is there's a ton of maladies that show up in tunnel tomato that could be mistaken for diseases or insect pests. So that might be another way for you to start out is like, here are your key insect pests, but here's how you distinguish insect pests from other stuff. Part of the reason we see so many maladies is that like there's a couple different reasons you're seeing a lot of maladies, a lot of things we don't understand because there's more heat stress, there's more high humidity stress, there's issues with like nutrient movement that's like making tunnel tomatoes do weird things we've never seen before. Sam, what are you hearing people talk about when it comes to maladies in tunnels?
Yeah, Kathy, I really like that idea. So we discern like abiotic disorders versus biotic disorders and like the patterns that you would see first. So for the abiotic disorders, like what Anna's mentioning, like you'll see more of a regular distribution through the tunnel. Like I went to one tunnel the other day and the entire edge row had this like leaf curling. And so the grower was like, what happened here? Like this entire row on the edge has like this curling. We think it's like herbicide drift. So it came in where they were spraying herbicides and they hit the tomatoes. And so really there's like a clear line of exposure, whereas the biotic stuff is much more patchy and you'd see kind of that area of concern. It kind of bleeds out from there. But for maladies, something I've been thinking a lot about is tomato, the gold flecking on fruit. So apparently like thrips cause gold flecking, but that regular gold flecking that like is very regularly patterned on the fruit isn't always caused by thrips. It's more abiotic that causes this like gold flecking that's very uniform, whereas the thrips kind of have a different pattern. It's a little bit more irregular and has like circles.
And knowing that is very important for the growers who are using pesticide, because a lot of the times you'll have somebody who's like, I have thrips, I'm applying this, it's not working, and come to find out it's just the gold flecking.
Yeah.
So that's an issue that could avoid a lot of unnecessary application of pesticides. I think blossom end rot might be a thing too.
We see a lot of blossom end rot, and that's off like a calcium. It's a weird calcium. It's not a deficiency, but it's the inability of plants to take up calcium because of some other soil-related issues. So you could have plenty of calcium, but the plants can't take it up because of pH or something.
It's like growing pains. Like the plant grows too fast. It can't move its calcium around. Also, if it's really humid in the greenhouse, like they're not respiring as quickly.
Yeah.
So they're not able to move the calcium. I think the most important thing is to notice is that like blossom end rot is a nutritional problem, but sometimes you'll have secondary infections. So you'll see like white mold and stuff.
Oh,
So recognizing that you might see something that like somebody thinks is a pathogen, it's actually a nutrient deficiency. And that might be actually ameliorated by like, well, better humidity regulation, like better airflow would be good if it's a fungal disease or if it's a nutrition deficiency.
It's more the diseases that get misidentified. The insect stuff is pretty clear. Like you'll see the insect on there. The damage looks very insecty. You'll see droppings. The diseases are trickier.
I agree. For sure.
Yeah.
Especially when you get launched into stuff that like shouldn't be any of our business. Like we're entomologists. I don't know why it hurts my feelings every time someone's like, hey, what about slugs? What about jumping worm?
Yeah.
I'm like, how dare you?
You guys
We, of course, had a much longer conversation about a survey of leaf-footed bugs that Kathy was conducting in vegetable crops. There's a couple different species of these like really showy, piercing, sucking, feeding insects because they can cause damage that looks a little bit like stink bug injury. And she is interested in understanding their pest status in Kentucky. We've heard rumors that they can move into tomato and cause cosmetic injury that looks like stink bug, that kind of starburst pattern of that piercing, sucking damage, but she's going to find out more. So watch that space. I'll leave it here for now, but I'm so grateful for all of my guest co-hosts. It's so great chatting with you guys. Let me know what you'd like to hear about, and thanks so much for listening. Serious Grower Podcast is a production of New Hampshire Community Supported Research. If you are interested in becoming a co-host or would like to learn more about our mission to democratize agricultural research, visit our website at nhcsr.org. If you want to learn more about anything we're talking about, make sure to check out our YouTube channel at NHCSR, where we're sharing insights from the agricultural research community and vlogging about our research efforts on the farm. You can support this work by liking and subscribing, and even better, consider joining our Patreon community.